There is a formula to getting straight nines or A stars in English literature. It is the reason why I get straight nines, and after watching this video to the end, that's gonna be your reason too. You might want to take notes or just replay certain sections within the video because this is going to be very information dense. The first part of this formula is having an unbreakable understanding of the question. Now, even as a grade 9 student, sometimes I misunderstand or have to reread the question a few times in order to actually get it. Having this strong understanding of the question will also help you to come up with the strongest arguments as you'll be attacking the question from all of its dimensions. I'm doing this for the specific text that I study, however this can be applied to any text in the world. For example, how does Dickens present the effects of loneliness and isolation in A Christmas Carol? Straight off the bat, I think the mistake that most students will make with this question is only talking about loneliness and isolation, right? That is part of the question, but they haven't asked you, where does Dickens show loneliness and isolation in A Christmas Carol? They've asked you, how does he present the effects of loneliness and isolation? So breaking that down, they're asking, what did the isolation and loneliness in A Christmas Carol cause? And I remember in my essay, I interpreted it in a way of which it was like, yeah, there's this loneliness and isolation, but its effects make Scrooge miserable and destroys him on the inside. And then it also makes the people surrounding him destroyed on the inside and miserable too. And then the how does Dickens is also significant, but we'll come back to that in a second. How does Shakespeare represent Macbeth as a male character? Now, how does Shakespeare, significant, come back to that in a second. Represent, we're talking language techniques, structure techniques, whatever. And then Macbeth, as soon as you see the word Macbeth, there should be a million different Macbeth quotes coming to mind. So we're using that character Macbeth now as a male character. This as a male character part is very vague. You can interpret the as a male character thing in a variety of different ways, and I think it opens up a very broad section of ideas for answers. The way that I personally interpreted it was Macbeth as a toxic masculine character. However, even though the essay that I wrote got 27 out of 30 and then 4 out of 4 in SPAG, my teacher said that one way that I could have improved it was by looking at it in terms of like more Shakespeare's time, like contemporary times, because talking about toxic masculinity, like that's a very 21st century thing. But even with that 21st century mindset, still got me a grade 9, so but yeah, I'm going very in depth on just that one question. We'll come back to essays and examples in a second, but I want to talk about the how does Dickens, how does Shakespeare part. Even though the question says how, the examiners also want you to be thinking about why did the author choose to do this. That's why they put the author's names within the question. How does Dickens, how does Shakespeare, how does Orwell? They want you to comment on why the author has done what they've done. And I know your teachers have already told you where you can add context. It will push you into getting that AO3. This is your golden opportunity to add context, but I'll show you an example and we'll come back to that in a second. Now, we're still in the exam. We've just finished breaking down the question. What is the next part of the formula? Based off of what you've studied, the quotes that you've memorized, etc., now I need you to come up with your very own opinion on what you think the answer to the question is. This is the tricky part because it's abstract. There's no wrong or right answer. Your answer will always be right as long as you can prove why your answer's right. This is what I love about English. It's literally just arguing. If you love arguing or proving yourself right, this is the subject for you. All you are doing the entire exam is just arguing with the examiner the whole essay until they're like, you win. grade 9. But that arguing requires critical, analytic, perceptive thought. And that's why I love English, because it's applicable to real life. You get good at arguing your point in English, you get good at arguing your point in real life too. But the thing is, I can't train you to have an opinion or to have my opinion or to think the way that I do. It's up to you to develop those critical analytic skills. But I can show you an example of how my brain thinks. Let's look at this example of a grade 9 essay I wrote and try and break down, just in the introduction, why it got that grade 9. This one was for an inspector calls. So the question for this essay was, how does Priestley present what life is like for women in an inspector calls? First thing I did was repeat the question. In J.B. Priestley's An Inspector Calls, he presents life for women as full of anguish and suffering. And then I just elaborate on that opinion. He subsequently blames this on the patriarchal nature of society. Then it's a bit wordy. I don't know why I repeat and just say in an inspector calls again. But again, in an inspector calls, Priestley may have written this play to challenge contemporary gender views. There's my why. There's my why Priestley has done it. And highlight the devastating effects that such can have on women, especially those of the working class. And there you go. I've added in my context. Beautiful. Now just going into a few little sections within that. So I've added in a semicolon. They say they want you to use a wide range of punctuation or whatever. So where you can use semicolons, dashes, brackets, square brackets, then just use them because, yeah, they like that, I guess. Also, just check your spelling as well. For Priestley, I always used to spell it wrong and forget the extra E on the end. And spelling is a good thing to know. But then again, honestly, don't stress yourself about SPAG too much, because SPAG is only 4 marks out of the 24 marks that you're going to get for an essay like this. Just try your best, but please don't stress about it. It's probably not going to be the defining factor of whether you get a 9 or not. And then, there's a little part on the mark scheme where they're like, just be careful when you're writing stuff. If it's a book, it's a book. If it's a play, it's a play. And mention that. Try not to get them confused, because there is a part on the AQA mark scheme where they're like, you need to know that this is a fictitious work and you need to know that it's a play or a book or whatever. Now, I want to go into the formula for a killer paragraph. Now, thing is about the paragraph I'm about to show you, you do not need to mimic the structure of this paragraph entirely. I don't even mimic the structure of this paragraph entirely, but I think that when you're lost or you don't know what to do or you don't know what order to do it in, this is a good little backup to get you to think about the order that you can put it in order to make sure you're reaching all the points you need to in order to get that grade 9. So, okay, let's take a look at this example paragraph. This was actually the shortest paragraph that I wrote. If you're curious, what did I get on this essay? Let me just check. I got 27 again. 27. Oh yeah, no, they do mark you for SPAG on this question. Anyway. And this is like the model paragraph. It's quite short, but I just write long paragraphs. I just don't know when to stop. Priestley continues with this idea by showing the consequences of the misogynistic treatment of Ava Smith when the inspector describes her death. So that is my point. And then I've also just slightly given a description of like where the quote I'm about to say comes from, just for clarity purposes, because like in order to get into those types of grade boundaries, your essay, your writing, your communication, it needs to be clear. And this is just my way of trying to make it clear. The disinfectant had burned her... Burned? I did write the word burned, right? Sorry, I can't read my own handwriting. This is horrible. Had burned her inside out, of course. Right, so this quote is going to be my evidence here. Also, don't worry too much if you can't remember a quote exactly. As long as you've got the general gist of it, the examiners aren't going to take away marks like that. The use of this graphic descriptive imagery may not only be a demonstration of the physical suffering that Ava had to endure, but the widespread mental and emotional suffering that all women of the working class would have to endure. Wow! So just in one quite long sentence, I've analysed the quote that I've just given. And even my teacher put on the side interesting analysis, because I don't think that my teacher had seen very many people come up with that idea, which is another tiny thing on the AQA mark scheme where they're like, oh, if it seems unique or like something that not a lot of people have come up with, then more marks can be awarded. But again, you're still going to get marks if you say like an analysis that everyone else uses, but you'll just get more if the analysis is a bit more unique. And then I go on to say, now this is the point where I add in Priestley's intentions and context. So I go on to say, Priestley may have used this metaphor to convey the realism and depth to the suffering of working class women in a tangible and physical manner. Then I quickly, just in one phrase, link it back to the question, only further emphasizing this struggle. And now I need to go downstairs because I think my dad is here. And while I go check if my dad is there, let's outline and go back to this secret grade 9 formula. So number 1, we break down and we understand the question. Number 2, we write down our opinion. We come up with it. This is still part of the introduction. Number 3, we state why the author has done this and link it back to context. That will still be in your introduction. And then you need to go into your paragraphs, of which we've just outlined the killer paragraph structure. Which, would you look at that? I'm back now and here to talk more about that killer paragraph structure. So I don't know if you've already noticed, but this paragraph does have the structure: point, evidence, analysis, and then I go into why Priestley has done this. In my school, we used to call it reader's response. I don't know what to call it. And then I just very quickly link it back to the question. So that was, the thing is that I'm looking back on, like, when I did this in the exam, I did not notice that I was doing this structure, but come to look back on it in hindsight, this is a really good example paragraph. I think that where you're going to get a lot of the marks and where a lot of students struggle with is in the analysis. But how do you even come up with strong analysis, Tara? Again, I'm speaking about all these structures and what to do and how to do it, but I haven't spoken about how to get those ideas in the first place. I will be so real with you. I get straight 9s in English literature. At least 70% of what I've written on that paper, I have not come up with myself. It's either my teacher mentioned it in class and I stole it, or I looked up a grade 9 analysis video, or one of my friends said something really intelligent and I just stole it from there. You can get away with stealing ideas in English literature, but for obvious reasons, you can't in GCSE language. You're probably already doing this, and you should continue to do this. Steal great analysis. I'm not saying word for word, but general idea, steal it. Now, in terms of preparation, the best thing that you can do is to prepare for as many themes / as many characters as you can to come up. However, I will say there is a shortcut. Because not all quotes, not all themes, not all things that happen in the text are made equal. Some of them are more likely to come up than others. I like to call these power quotes or power themes, simply because 9 out of 10 times you can find a way to link it back to the question, no matter what that question is, and get yourself some marks. For example, in an inspector calls, a power theme that you need to be revising is inequality, right? Because you can link it back to literally every question that they give you. They ask you about gender, speak about gender inequality. They ask you about money, speak about class inequality. They ask you about generational differences, speak about inequality there. Now, I just gave an example of a power theme, but there are power quotes, as in quotes that fit with nearly every theme too. An example, back on that An Inspector Calls one, there was a point in the play where Mrs. Burling says, as if a girl of that sort would ever refuse money. This one fits with just so many themes, it's stupid. You can tie it back to generational differences because she refers to Eva as a girl despite the fact that she's a 24-year-old grown woman. You can tie it back to gender differences because this quote makes Ava look like a gold digger. You can tie it back to social class inequality or even collective responsibility for the same reason. Despite the fact that Mrs. Burling owns a charity, she's still looking down on people who ask for money. Feel free to steal that analysis. You're welcome. You see how all I did was memorize one quote, yeah? And look how many themes that I've been able to connect that to. Now, if I just even... Where did I put this damn thing? If I just show you my Christmas Carol book, I have no annotations in here at all. Like what? I have like one thing. What is that? On the page where they show you all the chapters. Contents page. But like in this entire damn thing, I don't know if you can see because of the lighting, I don't have any annotations, anything in here. Yet I did my Christmas Carol essay and that still contributed to my grade 9. In fact, what you saw on the thumbnail, aka that 84 out of 96, that was what I got in English Literature paper 2. Proud of myself for that. In my last mocks, I haven't actually sat anything sitting at this. Yeah, let's not talk about how soon my GCSEs are, because what I do, I don't memorize the whole book, right? I just memorize the most important parts and move from there. Do not waste your time trying to remember 100 different quotes. Just pick the few ones that match up with many different themes. Unless, of course, you actually enjoy the story or whatever, go ahead, go crazy with the annotations. If you actually enjoy the story, then like go crazy with trying to memorize all of this, and if you actually enjoy doing that. But I know that most of us don't. Now, of course, as I said, you need to memorize them. You won't be given the book or the play in your exam. If you just naturally have a good memory, that's brilliant, you're sorted. But if you're like me and have an average memory, we're going to need to put in a bit more work than that. You need to make sure it actually sticks. So as you're probably already familiar with, use methods of active recall rather than passive recall. As in, don't just read your notes passively and expect yourself to remember everything. Actually test yourself with things like flashcards, quizzes, asking friends to question you, etc. Yeah, it's long, but if you put the effort in, you're guaranteed that grade 9, and this is probably the simplest way to do it. One way that I memorize my quotes is, if I just scooch to the side so I can show you in the editing, I'll make a flashcard, yeah? On the front, I'll put the theme. On the back, I'll put some quotes that link to that theme. Now, I think this is a better idea than doing something like, what do they call them? Is it like cue cards? Well, like you'll have part of the quote on the front, the full quote on the back. I think it's a good starting point, don't get me wrong. But in the exam, you're not going to be given part of a quote and told to remember it. All you're going to be given is a theme, right? So link up quotes with those themes / with those characters so that immediately in the exam, when you see something like, oh, I don't know, the supernatural, you can just have quotes on standby that link to the supernatural. Now, something important. How many quotes are you supposed to memorize? I would say that depends on A, what grade you're aiming for, and B, how much time you have left before the exam. If you're aiming to pass / if you don't have a lot of time left, focus in on the top 4 to 5 themes for the text and memorize quotes from each and every theme. I'll talk about how many in a second. If you're aiming to pass with flying colors / if you have a lot of time left, focus in on the top 7+ themes for the text. You can do more depending on how complex the text actually is. Now again, quotes. You want to have these quotes for every single theme that you're dealing with here. I'm not going to put a specific number on it because it depends on the quality of your analysis. Like for example, me personally, I pick about 7. And even within those 7 quotes that I've picked for one theme, I'm usually not going to be able to get through all of them within the essay that I do. But the reason why I only pick 7 and maybe don't even finish them the whole essay is because in just one of those quotes, I could pick about 3 to 5 things to analyze to match up with the question. But rule of thumb, if your analysis is really in depth, you can maybe risk using slightly less quotes. If your analysis is less in depth, you probably want to be using a lot more. Now, before you go off revising, please, I beg of you, please, do not waste your time studying unnecessarily long or studying just ineffectively. If you want to check how effective your study method is, click here to find out.